So as we transition back, that's going to be the theme of our next presentation, which is going to talk all about that transition that we make from one school to another, and in particular from middle school to high school. So to speak about how we can improve the freshman transition, Amy Rich and Carol LaValle.
It's hard to say.
So anyone who knows us has probably heard us speak on this topic a lot because this is what we are passionate about. And being together, working together, and being in this district for 11 years, we have really seen an evolution of kind of what's happened with the 9th grade transition over time. And I hate to even call it an evolution because I feel like we've kind of regressed over the last 11 years. Yeah. So we focused on two questions. One being, why is a freshman transition important? This would be when you would click the slide. Don't sleep on the job. And what is Nashua doing? And what do we need to be doing better? So we examined both the history, the broader context of what the research says, and where we're currently at. And we did some assessments on our own district. So I'm going to elaborate on what the research says, and Amy's going to explain a little bit more about Nashua specifically. So the first thing is just what's the problem with the 9th grade year? Like, why is this the year that matters so much? And this particular quote I really loved. It says, if you want to change your school, you better begin with the freshmen. And I think this is a problem that we have chronically in Nashua. We tend to not be consistent with how we start programs, and we will just start them willy-nilly. We might not continue them, and we just kind of bring them in, phase them out, and it seems like this kind of like ever-flowing problem. And so if we start with the freshmen, what people have found is that student success is not like a fixed thing. Changing your school and improving an entire district is actually very easy if you start with that 9th grade. I don't want to say easy, that's probably misspeaking, but it's doable. And I think we could probably see a lot more success if we focused more of our resources in the 9th grade. The other thing I want to mention is a lot of times the student success rate is kind of gauged based on student dropout, which in Nashua does not look to be a problem on paper. The student dropout rate does not look especially bad. However, I think in sticking with like the mission of our school, really we're trying to make successful lifelong learners, and we're trying to have people go out into the world and be successful adults. And so if we look at that and we think about how many of our students are actually doing that, I think that's more of the measure of success, because life doesn't stop after you graduate high school. So that we kind of had to kind of look at the big picture, because if you look at Nashua's dropout rate, those numbers are not really going to mean much. However, the failure rate in grade 9 is 3 to 5 times higher than that of any other grade. And I think that's especially interesting to us. Can you go back for a minute? I slipped. Because when we both teach exclusively 9th graders, and we see this all the time, that they come in, they're not ready to be in high school. They are not necessarily prepared for the freedom. I think that's one of the biggest issues, for the independence. There's no line in the middle of the hallway telling them which side to walk on. No one's giving them homework detentions. So I think these are some of the issues that we see. It also provides a really pivotal intervention point because it's brand new. They're like babies when they come in to high school, and it would be a perfect time to start to shape students for who we want them to be when they leave us. It's also one of the most difficult transitions, and so this is where our support needs to come in. I don't know why we often put the onus on the students. We want the students to be accountable for their actions, but we know that this is the most difficult transition for them, and yet we don't do much to support them. We say, well, they need to be more mature, and they need to figure it out, and we're going to just kind of throw them in, and it's sink or swim. But I don't know why we have that attitude with these 9th graders when we would never expect that of middle school or elementary schoolers. But these guys come up and we just instantly expect them to act more grown up. They've had no practice. So things that, back. things that kind of hold kids back, especially when kids start ninth grade and they get off track. Even if they're off track in like semester one, and off track would basically mean that they are not getting the credits that they need, they're failing a class, that would be considered what is off track. And this often happens when they believe things about themselves that are negative. They see themselves in a negative way. They don't have the credits that they know they're going to need for sophomore year, and an inability to recover from past failures. So I think a lot of times kids who are on the more immature side tend to see things in extremes. Oh my God, I don't have that credit. I'm never going to be a sophomore. I'm not going to graduate. I might as well give up now. I'm never going to do anything with my life. And they just kind of go from there. And so that continues to hold them back. If they fail as soon as they get here, they're just going to repeat that pattern. The other thing that holds them back is that a lot of times they are underperforming when they get here. They might be 2 to 3 levels below where they should be in reading, writing, math, etc. So those are all the things that kind of are additional obstacles. The other thing is that we can see early warning signs, and any teacher will tell you that they are really tuned into a lot of these early warning signs, but currently we don't do anything with them. We might know that a kid is not going to do well, but we will just, we'll shout it from the rooftops that this kid isn't going to do well, and we don't have a lot of interventions that we can really do for them. So irregular attendance, which we've talked a lot about today, persistent behavioral issues, and poor grades in middle and elementary school. So these are all things that are like trackable data points that would tell us if a student is at risk of dropping out, failing multiple classes. I say dropping out, but I really do think that taking an alternative pathway to graduation might be a better way to put it, or having graduation be a longer process than the 4 years. So these are all things that we could look for. And what the research shows is that if we monitor the early warning signs and we actually do something to intervene, ultimately we will have fewer students failing and more students graduating, but more importantly, more adults who are ready for the real world. Specifically though, those interventions need to take place in the 9th grade year, because after that, it's like the pattern has been established, and it's really, really hard to go back and say, oh, let's start this in junior year, because those habits have been now practiced for a lot of years. And sometimes it's too late. I know as teachers, we like to think that it's never too late to turn it around. We always want to give them hope, but we also need to do more to step in earlier. So we know all of these things. And so we ask, so what? And what's really interesting is no matter what, when you do intervene, no matter how they intervene to get students back on track, graduation rates increase 3 years later. So when interventions happen in the 9th grade, we see huge improvements to student success over their time in high school. However, this all sounds like, oh my gosh, if we just start doing things, it'll be better. That's great. That's what we want to hear. But it's really hard to find things that are cost effective. So principals, administrators, districts are saying, all right, great, I will intervene. What are we going to do? But we need to find things that are manageable, not too much work for teachers, and don't cost too much. So that's really what we tried to focus on, because this project ended up being a lot bigger than we thought. It's such a huge question and such a huge issue. We tried to find a couple case studies that gave us manageable things that we could actually do. So what did we find? We found that in the Chicago Public Schools, which I really liked because they do a lot of really interesting research, and obviously it's an urban district, they use a data tracking system, which Nashua does have. We do have a data tracking system, however, it's not widely known, not widely used. We kind of tinkered around with it, you tinkered around with it. I think if more people knew about it, we used it more effectively, that could be very cool. But basically what they did was they started tracking kids in their freshman year. So it was really like a high school tracking system. And they used it to identify students that were at risk of dropping out. So they might have looked at, again, like behavior, attendance, and grades. And for kids who were at risk. They targeted interventions towards them, and they made sure to do it right away. So it was like real time. They could see kids who were failing classes, they could see kids who weren't showing up, and teachers could do it. It was flexible the way they wanted to use it, but you could really intervene at any point. Teachers and admin could pull reports, and they could start making impactful interventions right away. And then that would, the data tracking wouldn't just stop at the end of their 9th grade year. You could actually see what happened over time. And when we were pulling a lot of data, we were trying to find a place to look at 9th grade to 12th grade. We asked so many people. No one could tell us anything about how to track these kids from 9th to 12th grade. And we have the technology, so we're not really sure why we're not looking at it. Why are we not using it? It seems really, really silly if we know that the research supports that kids, and this bottom statistic here is pretty meaningful, even though they use the data in various ways, no matter what, between 2007 and 2013, the on-track rate rose 25%. Didn't matter race or gender, the number of students who were on track to graduate rose 25%, which is super cool, just by using data. So another case that we looked at was in Dallas, and we made a note here that it was a very similar district to Nashua in size and diversity. They basically implemented did I skip something? No. Nope. They implemented what was called a Keystone program for freshmen, and this is going to probably sound familiar to people. It's going to sound like freshman seminar. It is different in that it was not graded, and only teachers who wanted to do it were a part of the program. So it was all volunteer teachers. It was 12 weeks, so it was short. It was in the very beginning of their 9th grade year. It didn't last an entire semester, so it wasn't, long, drawn-out process. And basically, it just kind of monitored these students for the first 12 weeks in high school. It also taught skills. So it was like an orientation program to the school, the staff. They had admin come in. They had guest speakers from upperclassmen. Counselors came in to get to know their caseload. They did communication skills, time management skills, goal setting, all sorts of things like that. This would be a great time to do CTE introductions, get them used to that stuff. They went over the programs of study, course leveling, which has been a huge problem. We've talked about that at length in the teacher leader program, that kids are not coming into the high school in the right level. So it would be a great time to get all of that stuff kind of squared away and make sure that these kids are off to the right start. And what they found in Dallas was that after doing the Keystone program, their test scores went up by 14%. They found that they increased the number of college-bound students. They also increased the number, or tripled the number of students taking the AP exams. And I love this last bullet here. It says it became a driving force in changing the culture of the high school and enrolling more students in accelerated programs of study. And what that means to me is when you start kind of teaching the kids the way that you want them to be, the kind of learners that you want them to be, and helping them through it, supporting them socially and emotionally and academically, that they want to do well, they want to succeed, they don't want to fail. So it changed the entire culture of the school, because putting those kind of habits of mind in them in 9th grade really just put them on the right path, and they were good to go. It's something we talk about a lot at North, changing our school culture. It's something the student voice group talks a lot about. Like, how do we improve our culture? And I don't think you do it in your junior or senior year. You have to do it the freshman year. And those are the kids that are going to make the biggest impact overall. All right. And last but not least, the Smaller Learning Communities program. They basically published something that talked about a slew of different ideas for how to improve freshman transition. And these were the highlights of what they found. They think that middle school collaboration is a must. We have to have a better relationship between middle school and high school teachers, even if we just focus on the 8th and 9th grade teachers, getting them talking more, getting them working together, and figuring out how the curriculums can work together, which is extra challenging considering we've got competency-based and kind of, I don't know what we call the other kind, normal, the way it always has been. Traditional, thank you. So we've got two different systems. So I think that collaboration piece is even more important. Orientation programs, which would take place in that summer window between 8th and 9th grade for all students and parents to orient them to whether it's the building, the new way of grading, just everything that they're going to need to know for high school, which currently we offer, I think, one day. I think we call it like registering day or like come pick up your stuff day. Whatever that day is, it doesn't do a great job of orientation. Summer Bridge program. So historically, we've had Kickstart as a summer bridge program and Excel. That's changing this year. And what the Smaller Learning Communities program does recommend is summer bridge programs for all students for free, which is huge. That would be huge. But that is what they think will make a difference. Grouping and support planning, so having 9th grade teams of teachers that work together who have the same students, who can talk about those students similar to the middle school model, but also having the same planning time and having resources available during that planning time. So having access to, literacy coaches, math coaches, and just having that time to communicate and talk and work together. Academic support specifically for 9th grade. So not sharing your academic support person with grades 10 through 12, but actually having a freshman specific person that will work just with that class. And social and emotional support. As Amy's going to talk about with our survey results, one of the things that came up as the #1 issue that freshmen have in transitioning to high school is social and emotional problems. And yet every intervention that people thought students needed was an academic intervention. So that was a funny disconnect, that we're saying that the kid's problem is social and emotional, and yet all we want to do is get them to get better grades. So I think we need to make sure that we're actually supporting the social and emotional piece, and I think the academics will follow. Is that it for me?
Okay. Okay. So I kind of did more of the, what does like all of this mean for us? And I thought it would be beneficial to start with the kind of history of how freshman supports have been in the high school. And I focused more on North just because that's what I know better. And North and South have not always done exactly the same thing, but both schools have had kind of different programs that have come and gone and different things at different times. But something to note is that the high schools haven't had freshmen really for that long, because prior to 2004, the freshmen were at the junior highs for a very long time before that. So starting in 2004, when we opened the 2 high schools, freshmen moved to the high schools. And when that happened, there were sophomore and freshman specific guidance counselors and academies. There was a freshman seminar program. There was headmasters, so that was when there was a principal, there were 2 vice principals, and then there were 4 headmasters under those vice principals. So the freshmen had a headmaster and the sophomores had a headmaster that dealt mostly just with students and student discipline. Then between 2007 and 2010, there at North were added freshman-specific case managers for freshmen and sophomores, actually. So all of the, or most of the freshman students with IEPs had the same case manager who didn't teach classes, who was case managing full-time, and was available for students to go to for support within their classes every block. There were teamed classes, humanities classes, English and social studies, in mostly the freshman and sophomore year as well. At its height, there were 12 teams that existed for English and social studies classes for freshmen and sophomores. Then there was the Kickstart program, which was implemented for at-risk students, so a summer bridge program, but only by invitation for students who are at risk. Also during that time is when the administration structure changed and we lost the vice principals in favor of 4 assistant principals, so you have kind of a net loss of administrative support there. And then since 2010, Freshman seminar went away in favor of freshman writing, so we lost a class that had kind of maybe more of that skills, social emotional support for a much more academic freshman writing class. The humanities teams started to dwindle to the point where there currently are no humanities teams at North. There is no more freshman specific administrator, and then around the time that North went away from that, South got a freshman specific administrator, so that's one example of how things haven't always kind of been the same. The freshman and sophomore specific guidance counselors went away in favor of the alpha system as well. With the loss of a guidance counselor, when they made the guidance director, we went from 8 counselors to 7 counselors. And the freshman and sophomore case managers were dropped for, again, more of a system where they stay with the same case manager for their 4 years, and also the case managers went back to teaching classes. And some of the most recent kind of changes, so we've had E-Block, which is not really a freshman-specific support, but is a additional support that's been added in. The Titan Connections program, which is a mentoring program of seniors with freshman E-Blocks, and the Kickstart program in its previous form, was eliminated for this new Summer Y program. And then, like I said before, South has kind of had, also a variety of these supports, different times, sometimes at the same time. So what do we do to evaluate ourselves? We found a protocol that came with this really great rubric from the SLC work that has been done from the federal government on evaluating your freshman transition program. So we took that protocol and kind of applied our situation to that protocol, and we also did a staff survey. So the protocol is up there if anyone wants to kind of take a look at it later. I'm going to kind of go over the big bullet points, but it's a little bit more in depth. So the protocol has 3 levels. Yep. So the protocol has 3 levels. The beginning level is passive. So are you passively acknowledging your freshman transition? Are you passively kind of supporting freshmen? Some of the big bullet points for that indicators is teachers are working in isolation, support staff working in isolation, not necessarily a lot of communication between middle school and high schools as the freshmen transition. 9th grade students kind of just being treated like 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, tossed right into the pool with everybody else. A lack of formal time and space to teach essential skills, those kind of cross-curricular, non-course specific skills to freshmen, so a lack of time and a place, a vehicle to do that. The onus of reaching out or of communication kind of being put on students and parents. If they have an issue, they need to reach out to the school. And really not a lot of policies in place to guide and govern the freshman transition, as well as a lack of emphasis on using data. So that would be kind of like level 1 passive. And then the evaluation tool, the middle level is reactive. And that is kind of marked by a summer bridge program, but only for select students, mostly geared towards at-risk students. Teachers being encouraged to reach out to parents and students, but no real formal policy kind of governing how that's going to happen. 9th grade teams may exist, but really more only kind of in name and format, not really effectively working together to support students. Counselors, again, reaching out, but not really in a formal way to check on students, and teachers being kind of left on their own to provide supports for struggling students.
And I think in our assessment, we fell between passive and reactive, more on the passive end, but we did have some aspects of the reactive approach.
And then there's proactive, which is kind of, the goal, like where they found, students, schools with the most effective freshman transition programs, these are the things that they do. They embed interventionists and literacy strategies and skills within classes. Interventionists work hand in hand with teachers to help teach these skills to students as they're going through their freshman year. There's a summer bridge program offered to all students, all incoming freshman students, regardless of their at-risk status or not. There is ongoing formal communication between the high school and the parents, also the high school and the middle schools. So lots more communication kind of enveloping these students, as well as more formal teaming environments that are working together much more intentionally rather than just kind of like saying you have a team. And the idea that each student kind of has a personalized plan that would follow them through their freshman year. So like Kara said before, Nashua kind of falls between the passive and the reactive columns of this assessment tool. There are some pockets of really amazing support for students, but they're not systematic. They're not formalized to make sure that students are not falling through the cracks. And there isn't really a systematic approach to teaching them the skills that they need, which Kara was kind of talking about before, where we can't expect freshman students to just show up to high school with everything they need for high school. We have to have some way to usher them through that freshman year to make sure that they, by the end of it, are prepared for those final 3 years of high school.
I think in a lot of ways, if we think of behavior and, socialization and emotions like competencies, we would never expect these guys to come in with everything they need to get A's on everything. And so the fact that teachers say, oh my God, these freshmen, oh God, they're so immature. It's like, yeah, that's part of our job. We have to help them through that. And that we are not currently doing that. And I think we see that in a lot of the freshmen's grades, their behaviors, and things like that.
This is some data from the survey that we conducted, and we asked, we had a number of choices, and we asked teachers at both North and South, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do we support the freshmen? And you can see that we have kind of like a overall, 3, 4. So there's this feeling that we do okay, that we could definitely do better. There's not a lot of support for the 5. And then the choices that they had were, what are the biggest challenges that you think our freshmen face? And the top 3 choices really, or the top 3 choices among our staff really confirms what we were reading in our research, that it's a lot of those social, emotional skills, soft skills kind of pieces that we don't really have a way to teach and to help freshmen develop. And you can see up there. What we also found pretty interesting was the lowest frequency answers as well, which were truancy and low class attendance. And I think that confirms what Kara and I have both experienced over the past 10 years, is that freshmen show up for the most part.
Every day, all the time.
There are a lot of kids who will show up almost every day and still fail because they lack a lot of the skills to be able to really access the curriculum, to deal with everything that's happening in their lives.
Diane asked, how is it that kids are missing 15 or more days and still passing? And we asked, how is it that our freshmen are sitting in front of us every single day and failing? Mm-hmm. That's my question, right? That's a thinker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of our takeaways, like I was just saying, attendance really is not much of an issue for the freshmen specifically, and that their lack of self-management skills is an issue. And we really need to figure out a way to deal with these non-course specific skills that the students really need.
The survey also included a question that we didn't include here because we're going so over time, and I'm sorry. We're so passionate about this. About what needs to be done to help freshmen, and the most illuminating thing was that people overwhelmingly thought we needed harsher consequences. We needed to just tell these freshmen to buck up and shape up. So people are not overwhelmingly nurturing towards 9th grade students. If anything, they just want them to be better. And that, to me, I feel like is the crux of the problem that we're seeing here.
So what should we do? We could use data more effectively. That student performance profile in X2, while I think maybe in middle school and elementary school it's used a lot more, among high school teachers it's not used as often. But it's really no surprise that a lot of the students who are failing and who are struggling because they struggled in middle school. And when you learn how to use that student performance profile, you can see that. You can see kind of all their middle school grades. And a lot of the students who are struggling got a lot of D's and F's in middle school, and that is not magically fixing itself once they get to high school. And these are more of the students that don't have IEPs. Like, they don't have that safety net already in place. These are just the regular, kind of mainstream type student.
Middle majority, I think, is kind of like the kids that fly under the radar, don't have anyone following up with them.
Yeah. And the next one is intervening early and often. We unfortunately kind of wait for students to fail and then scoop in and try to pick them back up. So we need more ways to get people in the school who freshmen are their priority. We've noticed that, for guidance, the time that freshmen need the most support is also the time that seniors need the most support to transition out of this. So we need to find more people or have more people who are able to prioritize freshmen before they irreversibly fail. And then the last one is one that we struggled with because we don't really have a clear vision of what it should look like, but we need to explore some ways to have a vehicle to teach these skills and provide this social emotional support for freshmen in a more formal way. Whether that's like a freshman seminar, maybe it's a quarter class, maybe it's something that happens through eBlock. We didn't really know exactly what that should look like, but having something somewhere that does that.
I think it's important to note, too, that we need to make sure the teachers that are doing that program are prepared to do that program. They want to do that program. They care about 9th grade students, because it will not be effective if they don't.
And then we have this picture. Well,
this is how we felt doing this project.
Yes, and having taught freshmen primarily, both of us for 11 years, going into this, we kind of felt we know the answers, we know the solutions. And then once we started to really delve into the issue, we found more questions and more problems and more facets of the issue than we ever thought before.
Yeah, so we do not have a very formal proposal here. We don't have, budget numbers and things like that, because we really this was very much a big idea project for us of how we can start to improve, and if we have the privilege of being a part of this program next year, we can maybe explore some of these in more depth. This is how we feel on a day-to-day basis, and looking into how to solve the problem. So we don't leave you with a ton of answers.
Yeah. Sorry.
Is it possible, I as a middle school teacher and someone who has sat through lots and lots of steering committee meetings at the middle school level, and an 8th grade teacher, and have talked to the head teachers at the high school and done some vertical discussion, I think it is so, I can't say it so much, that you put on what you should do as that vertical discussion with the middle schools. It is imperative that systematically that we look at what's happening at the middle school in that transition to the high school, what you are seeing is much like what we are seeing in the 8th grade. And like you said, when you look at the data, when you look at the student's file, and it's not surprising that if they failed in middle school, that they're failing in high school. And I mean, as we send them off to you, it kills us. And when you say that they come up and they're 2 to 3 grade levels behind, and we hear from our 6th grade teachers, when they come up, they're 2 to 3 grade levels behind, and I'm sure you see the data that says that too. It is so important, and I feel so passionately about it also, that this is a district discussion about that. That includes both 6 through 8 and 9th grade teachers also. So thanks for bringing light to it, because it's so important that we talk, all of us, about it. That transition.
All right, I'm going to be a little egocentric here, because Amy and I both teach AP World to 9th graders. And Mr. Apple's here, so I'm going to put his feet to the fire. Why don't you let us speak to the 8th graders about our expectations?
I think it's trying to get that equal access and
I want 5 minutes.
a overarching conversation so that all the options are laid out to them. It's part of that kind of comprehensive.
But there are expectations that some kids don't realize when they get there.
Sure. And I don't think that's unique to the AP classes.
No, but still,
That's a
it's a unique class that most districts do not offer 9th graders.
Well, I think like overarching, kids among all levels, even if you look at the kids who always struggle, like they struggle and they fail classes in middle school and they still they get passed on, there's no like stop. And so when they get to high school, they honestly do not believe you when you say like, you will be a freshman next year if you don't pass this class. Like, you cannot graduate high school if you do not pass world history. And they really do not believe you because they've kind of been Pavlovian conditioned to, you just march through and there's no stop.
Well, I wonder, to honor what Ian was just saying, if more high school teachers shouldn't go down to the 8th grade and talk to the kids, not just about AP courses, but about all high school courses. And expectations. And that was the beauty of Kickstart, was that we were able to take that group of struggling learners and really prepare them for that. And I think that would be an awesome thing, not just on the AP teachers, but the foundations teachers who say, listen guys, this is what you gotta do.
Right. I think the student voices a lot of times often resonate a whole lot more than the most credible and informed adult voices. So I know that's something we've done in pockets in the past, but I think that has some huge potential of, hey, I took this class 3 times and, listen to me as a student who struggled, telling you, you gotta get up to speed or it's just not gonna be as pleasant as it could be.
Gary?
So I am always thinking what's the next step forward, and we have a few people who had the privilege of talking to both the kind of the middle school and the high school, and I was thinking that to help kind of facilitate some of these discussions going forward, thinking some maybe our coaches like Lisa Janicek and Joanne Johnson, those types of people, to kind of talk about transition along with our social workers, people like Scott Jaquith, and like Michelle Keysworth and Elm Street. I know you have a social worker, and those might be the sorts of people that administrators could look to help maybe work on this transition. So if you're going to share this with anyone, maybe those types of people will probably be good people to share with.
Yeah, there are small pockets of people in this district that really care passionately about this, and I just don't think that we're doing enough. I don't think enough of our resources are going towards it. Like Brandy McDonald, the literacy coach here at North, and myself are hoping to teach a teamed freshman writing English class next year with targeted kids that need interventions that the 8th grade teachers and counselors have recommended for this class. And that's going to benefit 16 kids.
Yeah, because it's important that there's people who are talking about to the 8th grade and 9th grade teachers, and I was thinking those are people who do that already, and so that might be a natural conversion to kind of take this and say, okay, here's something that you can add to sort of the discussions, as we're talking to 8th and 9th grade teachers about this transition. So.
So what about utilizing e-books? Sorry.
Yeah, Cheryl.
Okay. So I know when e-book, first came around, we were looking at grouping students on grade level. I'm assuming they're still all grouped on grade level. E-block teachers have the ability to run monitor reports on students every week, every 2 weeks. It could be a way where you said, if you have the teachers who want to teach the specific group, that when you have your targeted students, they could be their e-block teachers. It's a start, but it would fit within the system that we already have in place.
We had talked about last year, trying to finagle e-block to, who wants to be a freshman e-block teacher? And maybe you're not the e-block teacher there for 4 years, but maybe you always shepherd a group of freshmen. But those e-blocks can't be as big as all the other e-blocks because the freshman e-block teachers are doing so much more and would need to do so much more. Like your freshman e-block maybe needs to be 12 kids. And then maybe when you're a sophomore, sophomore, junior, senior, maybe the e-blocks go to like 20, 24. Like we have people who are really want to work with freshmen, but we can't expect them to deal with the same amount of kids if they're having to put so many more supports in place for those kids as, have all the other levels.
Yeah, this all sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually already been done. There's a curriculum that exists, right, for freshman advisory.
Yep.
Yes, we have a curriculum that exists that no one's using. It's collecting dust. And there's also something that the e-block committee created last year for how this model of freshman e-blocks being combined the following year when they need less support, like what Edie was just saying. We created a proposal for that. All of those things are gathering dust.
While we're busy coming up with ideas and talking about ideas we've already come up with, an idea sort of hit me. We have, I know we have a grant in place for struggling learners right now. And something I'd love to see, especially as far as reaching out from one level to another, from middle school to high school, it would be nice to have, whenever we schedule it, a middle school, high school transition summit for a day. You could pay teachers to go through the grant, I would think, and actually discuss individual students. Have your stack of students who are coming in the same way. I know we do it in the math department. I'm sure other departments do it otherwise. When you print out the schedule of all the geometry kids and then you talk to the Algebra 1 teachers and go, hey, what can you tell me about these kids? Is there anything I need to know? And have that information now. Because the kid grid's nice on X2, but it's not going to tell you information like, well, this is Joey, don't sit him next to Chris under any circumstances. They're awful together. Or, this kid's always had an issue with one thing or another, or they really work well with somebody who's going to hold their feet to the fire, and this kid needs kid gloves. So something like that where you find out about the person before they even arrive. And there are things in place, grants and whatnot, that could potentially get us there. And I could see over the course of 3 days, maybe 2 of those 3 are, one day's Pennachuck North, and the next day is Elm Street with North and South taking turns, and then the next day is Fairgrounds. So you'd have a way of reaching North and South to the 3 middle schools in a way that you could learn about these students and be able to help them on day 1.
I also think that you have 8 years of sometimes bad choices dropped on your doorstep freshman year. And I think the whole district needs to look at social emotional learning holistically from K to 12. And I think if we did that, your freshman year might go a lot smoother, because what we're seeing in 7th grade and we're doing, not everyone's doing across the district. And we really focus on that as a team, but not all teams are. And then when they go to 8th grade, who knows what happens to those skills. So that might also be something to look into.
I think our expectations are very skewed when it comes to social emotional awareness and well-being of our students that come to us. We just expect them to be at a certain level of maturity. We would never expect a kid to come into freshman year just knowing calculus. That would never be an expectation that we would have, and we wouldn't shame them for not. We have to teach these things consistently over time. And a lot of teachers would argue that there is no time to, oh my God, I know, Gary, and I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.